You make a decision. You believe it was your choice. But a few days later, you repeat the same old pattern, the same reaction, the same type of conflict, the same feeling that something in you had already decided for you. It's as if there's an old script still playing out behind the scenes of your mind, even when you think you're in control. Carl Jung dedicated decades of his life to understanding why this happens, and he found the answer in a deep layer of the psyche, a space where ancient forces live, primordial images, behavioral patterns that don't belong to just one person, but to all of humanity. You're not just being influenced, you're being portrayed by symbolic figures that were born even before your consciousness. And the only way to change the story is to discover who's writing it for you. This writing has no pen, no ink, and yet it shapes you. That's what Jung found when he dove into the human unconscious, a symbolic repertoire that operates before thought, before reason, before the self you believe yourself to be. These symbols weren't invented by anyone. They arose over time, through the repetition of the same emotions, the same dilemmas, the same paths that billions of human beings have walked since the beginning of history. To this, he gave the name archetypes. But archetypes are not fixed characters. They are models, ancestral ways of perceiving, reacting, and interpreting the world. They live in what Jung called the collective unconscious, a deep layer of the mind where universal experiences are stored as living images. Imagine an inner force that activates whenever you face a loss, a challenge, a choice, or an intense desire. That's when they emerge, like the hero who must prove his strength, the caregiver who sacrifices themselves for others, the explorer who leaves everything behind in search of freedom, the sage who remains silent because they've seen too much. These patterns are not merely psychological. They appear in myths, fairy tales, religions, in the most distant cultures from one another. The divine mother, the stern father, the savior, the villain, the tempter, the messenger. Cultures change, but symbolic structures repeat. And that repetition is the clue. It shows that these are not just stories. They are reflections of what moves within us. An archetype doesn't need to be recognized to act. On the contrary, it's in the unconscious that it holds the most power. It's when we don't know we're being guided that its grip tightens the most. Jung observed this in thousands of patients, and in himself as well, by analyzing dreams, symptoms, and behaviors. He realized that the modern mind carries ancient myths, and that much of human suffering happens when someone is living out an archetype without realizing it. You don't need to believe in any theory for an archetype to act, just like you don't need to understand electricity to turn on the light. All you have to do is be alive. When you fall in love with someone who seems to complete you, when you feel an almost uncontrollable urge for justice, or when you enter a cycle of self-sabotage that you already know well, there's something bigger at play. A collective image, an ancient pattern that has found in you the perfect stage to manifest itself. This isn't fate, it's structure, and the more you ignore it, the more it repeats. That's why Jung didn't treat archetypes as enemies, but he didn't see them as enlightened guides either. They are powerful, yes, but neutral. They take shape according to the level of awareness of the one who carries them. And that's where everything starts to change, the moment you stop playing a role and start observing who's in the script and why. In some people, this script is driven by such a persistent force that it almost feels like destiny. They live within a recurring role, as if the same character is always waiting for the next act. The settings change, the names change, but the essence of the experience repeats with unsettling precision. This isn't chance. It's a symptom of a dominant archetype acting unconsciously. Jung observed that, throughout life, certain archetypes become more present than others. They don't ask permission. They show up as emotional tendencies, behavioral addictions, automatic reactions that take over before you can even think. Do you know someone who's always saving others? Or someone who's always at war with any form of authority? Maybe someone who needs to be desired all the time to feel alive. These aren't just personality traits. They are expressions of archetypal images that have crystallized at the core of the psyche. The problem isn't having them, it's being overtaken by them. The dominant archetype shapes preferences, relationships, career choices, even psychological illnesses, and all of this happens without the ego realizing it's being led. Jung compared this process to possession. Not in the mystical sense, but the psychological one. A part of the psyche takes over and begins to drive consciousness. Like an actor who steps onto the stage without rehearsal, improvising everything but always in the same way. Have you ever wondered why certain patterns repeat in your life, even when you try to do things differently? Have you ever had the feeling that you're living a story you already know, even though the circumstances are new? That's one of the clearest signs of a dominant archetype at play. But there is a way to notice. Observe, what is the role you tend to assume, even when you don't want to? What kind of praise feeds you the most? What do you fear people might discover about you? These answers reveal the form your persona is protecting, and the archetype likely behind it. To Jung, the persona is the mask we wear to adapt to the world. But when that mask fuses with our sense of identity, we forget there's something behind it. We forget that we're acting and start believing that it's all we are. That's why recognizing the dominant archetype isn't just an exercise in self-knowledge. It's an act of breaking free from illusion. You begin to realize that the obsession with control, the need to be strong all the time, or that constant fear of rejection, maybe those aren't really you, but the trace of an old pattern that needs to be seen before it can be dissolved. And in that moment, something changes. Not because the story has ended, but because, for the first time, you realize you can write a new one. Not every story needs to start from scratch to change direction. Sometimes, all it takes is a new point of view. A lens that lets you see not just what repeats, but why it repeats, and what it's trying to reveal. It was from this logic that Jung proposed something beyond understanding the dominant archetype. He taught that it's possible to integrate these inner forces and not just react to them. To integrate doesn't mean to control, nor to eliminate. It means to observe with clarity, to recognize the existence of these structures within you, and to create a conscious space between impulse and action. Think of the archetype as an emotional lens that colors everything you feel. When there is no awareness, that lens seems to be the world itself. But when you begin to recognize it, you can distinguish it from reality and gradually reposition your perspective. Every archetype carries power, but it also carries excess. The hero may have courage or an obsession with conquest. The caregiver may offer comfort or smother the ones they love. The sage may have clarity or hide behind rational coldness. The risk isn't in living out these aspects. It's in being lived by them without realizing it. Jung called this inflation, when a psychic part expands to the point of taking the place of the whole. It's when the ego identifies so strongly with an inner image that it loses balance and stops listening to the rest, and what remains is distortion. The hero becomes a martyr, the sage becomes arrogant, the caregiver becomes a victim. To avoid this, Jung proposed a path of differentiation, to perceive the parts without confusing them with the whole. That is the first step toward integration. In practice, the process can begin with 3 simple but profound movements. Movement 1. Name. Give form to the acting archetype. Realize, for example, that the constant anger might be the frustrated warrior, not the real you. Movement 2. Observe. Map where and how this archetype manifests. What activates it? What kind of people, situations, or words trigger this pattern? Movement 3. Invite the opposite. Reflect on which archetype is absent and could bring balance. If the hero is tired of fighting, maybe it's time to listen to the healer. This inner movement doesn't eliminate conflict, but it creates space, and in that space, something new arises. Choice. You can keep doing what you've always done, or you can explore a new path with more awareness and less repetition. Important to remember, integration isn't about replacing one archetype with another. It's about allowing more voices to exist within you, without any of them needing to dominate all the others. It's like an orchestra. If a single instrument plays all the time, the sound becomes noise. But when each one finds its place, chaos becomes harmony. Integration is this: reorganizing the inner stage, recognizing that there's an impulse that wants to protect, another that wants to take risks, another that wants to run away, and realizing that none of them needs to be the director of the play, because only when all of them are seen, heard, and repositioned does the real self begin to emerge, not as the lead actor, but as the silent center where everything can coexist. There comes a point when the presence of all these parts no longer confuses, it guides. Instead of inner noise, a quiet clarity begins to arise. As if, for the first time, something at the center were aligning the fragments. Jung called this individuation. Contrary to what many think, individuation doesn't mean isolating yourself or becoming someone different. It means becoming whole. It means accepting that contradictions coexist within you, and that maturing is about making space for each of them. Without rejection, it's a long path, and it doesn't happen by chance. The persona, the shadow, the archetypes, and the ego are just parts of a much larger system. Behind all of that, there is the self, the organizing core of the psyche, which is not the rational self, but a deep instance of wholeness. While the ego identifies with a single version of itself, the self observes them all. And it's from that observation that the true movement of transformation begins. Individuation, then, is not an external quest. It is a return, not to the past, but to the center. Throughout this process, the individual comes face to face with what was denied, projected, rejected, and realizes that pain often doesn't come from what was lived, but from what was ignored within. Jung saw this clearly. Psychic suffering is deeply connected to the refusal of wholeness. The more we try to be only light, the stronger the shadow becomes. The more we try to be only strong, the more the fragile in us begs to be seen. Individuation does not eliminate the shadow. It invites it to dance, and that invitation requires courage. It requires going through the discomfort of facing what one doesn't want to admit. It requires a willingness to revisit old roles, to break idealizations, to let go of control. But what is born from this process is something radically new, a more whole human being, more self-aware, less reactive, more capable of holding contradictions without being lost in them. It's a rare kind of maturity, not the kind that clings to certainties, but the one that learns to dwell within paradox. During his studies, Jung realized that this path is not reserved for a select few. It doesn't depend on education, religion, or status. It depends only on an inner willingness to listen to what comes from within, and to follow it even when the ego resists. The mandala, a recurring symbol in his patient's drawings, represented exactly that: a center, a form, a wholeness pulsing in the midst of chaos. And maybe that's what we miss the most: an inner axis that gives us back the sense of belonging, not to the outside world, but to the life moving inside. But we don't always recognize that inner movement clearly. Sometimes it comes disguised as routine. Other times as anxieties we can't name. There are moments when everything feels out of place, but for some reason we feel like we've been there before. That's when that strange feeling of reliving something arises. Jung realized that behind many human conflicts, there is a narrative pattern being repeated, an ancient plot shared by generations that continues to be performed through each person, even as faces and contexts change. This is what he called living a myth, not in the sense of believing in fables, but in being immersed in a deep symbolic structure that organizes experiences, values, dilemmas, and outcomes in an almost predictable, though unconscious way. It's as if each person carried a play written before they were even born and, without realizing it, kept playing the same role, act after act. The myth doesn't show up as something fantastic. It disguises itself as reality. It's in the woman who always sacrifices herself to be loved, in the man who needs to win at any cost to feel worthy, in the one who runs from all stability because he fears losing himself in comfort, or in the one who endlessly searches for someone to save him from himself. These scripts repeat not because we are doomed to suffer, but because a misunderstood lesson is being reenacted, hoping at last to be recognized. Here is the essential point. As long as the myth remains unconscious, it controls you. But from the moment you see it, it can become a symbol, and a symbol once recognized no longer imprisons but begins to guide. Jung said it precisely: until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Identifying your personal myth is not easy. It demands brutal honesty. It requires realizing that certain sufferings were chosen, not out of masochism, but familiarity. It takes courage to look at repetition with new eyes and ask, what is the story being told here? And why do I keep playing it out? That questioning is the beginning of transformation. It's when you stop blindly identifying with the plot and begin to observe the script from the outside. And in that moment, something opens, not as a definitive answer, but as a crack, the possibility to no longer repeat, but to recreate. Because yes, the myth can be resignified, the story can take a new turn, and the character you believed yourself to be can give way to something more authentic, something that no longer needs to prove anything, nor follow an inherited script. All it takes is for you to realize that the stage is the same, but the performance can be entirely yours. None of this makes sense if it stays only in the realm of theory. Recognizing an archetype is only the beginning. Real transformation happens when you start observing yourself in action in everyday life, in the conversation that irritates you, the repeated choice, the inner voice that always pushes you to the same place. That's where this knowledge takes shape. That's where you stop being led and begin to lead. This video is not about psychology. It's about freedom. It's about stopping the cycle of living through inherited patterns and starting to choose with awareness, with truth, with wholeness. Nietzsche once said, "Become who you are." Few phrases capture so precisely what Jung proposed with individuation. Becoming who you are does not mean chasing an idealized version of yourself. It means to stop running. It means to welcome what lives in silence, to look at what was denied, to integrate what was once fragmented. You did not come into this world to repeat old narratives, nor to be a prisoner of images you didn't choose. You came to awaken and to express what only you can bring into existence. May this video not end inside here. May it begin right where you are now, in the next gesture, the next thought, the next conscious silence. And if there comes a moment when everything feels confusing again, remember, chaos is only frightening until you realize you can organize it from within. If this content resonated with something alive in you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Write in the comments, "I am not the role, I am the author," and commit to your own consciousness. Share this video with someone who's ready to see themselves beyond the mirror. And click on the screen to watch more content that may expand your perception of yourself and the world. The turning point happens when you stop performing and start inhabiting your own essence.